without a lot of further ado, I'd like to present Karl so we can just hear what it is we need to know and get unscrambled in all of this energy things. Thank you, Karl.
Great. Well, thank you. Are you going to give me the share the screen, Will? All right.
You should be able to hit that share screen button.
Okay. And I hit something wrong here. Wait 1 second. Now I've got to figure out how to get rid of that. Okay. So and this isn't the first thing I'm going to talk about. Let me just give everybody a little bit of a background. And I see a lot of faces in your club, from my lawyer of 30 years, Al Harvey, to my friend, Mr. Jolinak, Jocelyn Wurzburg. A lot of y'all I go way back with. So Pam Awesome and others. So I welcome the opportunity to talk about something that's very dear to me, and that's the opportunity for the city of Memphis to end its almost 80-year relationship with TVA. And the organization that I started, my partner Terry Lynch and Jim Gillen and Jr. helped me start this, or I started, and then Jim joined me. Jim is a Rotarian, and it was a little upset that I set this date at a time that he was going to be on vacation with his family. So he did tell me that as a fellow Rotarian, he'd be glad to clean up anything I mess up and also answer any questions you might have. So let me give you a little background how I got involved in this. I first started learning a little bit about TVA when I managed Senator Sasser's Tennessee offices in the late 70s. And I can tell you that the TVA that I remembered from then, or that you might remember, or your father or your grandparents would remember, is not the TVA of today. At that time, TVA was funded by Congress. The chairman of TVA at that time was a gentleman that literally passed away 2 weeks ago, Dave Freeman, and he made $174,000 a year. He was not allowed to make more than any congressman was at that time, and TVA had to go to Congress to get its appropriations, and there was a checks and balance system set up. And what happened after that, sometime in the 80s, TVA became quasi and no longer received any appropriations from Congress, but instead they fund themselves by issuing debt. But they can do it with very much ease because it still has the backing of the full faith and credit of the government. So fast forward to today, it's my contention that TVA, who has now $24 billion of debt, no longer has checks and balances. They no longer go to Congress to seek appropriations and have to answer questions. And they've gotten out of control. But before I talk about that, let me just tell you, I wrote my first op-ed piece against what TVA had done in 2003. And at the time, Mr. Jolinak will remember, I was on the zoo board and I was raising money for the panda exhibit in Midtown. And I read in the paper that TVA had given $10 million out of their economic development fund to the aquarium in Chattanooga. And they touted it as one of the biggest tourist attractions in the state. And then I did a little research and I read that they had given $5.5, almost $6 million to something right outside of Knoxville, promoting the Great Smoky Mountains and all of that tourism. So I went to then president of Memphis Light, Gas and Water, who I knew, Herman Morris, and I said, Herman, would you help me? I'm trying to raise $16 million to build this panda exhibit. And I see where TVA is giving money to these other tourist attractions. Will you help me get some for Memphis? And I'll never forget what Herman told me. He said, Karl, it's a worthwhile project and I'll be glad to support it, but I'm lucky if they even return my phone calls. They do nothing for Memphis. And you are wasting your time trying to get money out of TVA for a Memphis project. Well, my little signature line on my stationery to this day is my Winston Churchill quote that I love. It's my favorite one that says, never, never, never give up. So I went to Knoxville with Herman's support, but once I got there, TVA told me, they said, well, we have now discontinued that economic development program. The funds are depleted and we are no longer making any grants. So not wanting to take no for an answer, I did research and I found out that TVA had never given Memphis anything. And that 10 million to the aquarium was just the latest of a long list. So I wrote an op-ed piece back in 2003 talking about TVA not participating proportionately and properly in the Memphis market. So fast forward to this past fall, and somebody that was working on getting Memphis Light, Gas, and Water to leave asked me to meet with Franklin Haney, who I had not seen in 30 years. And he was promoting the nuclear project and trying to sell, get Memphis Light, Gas, and Water to leave TVA so he would have an avenue to sell nuclear energy to, assuming he was successful in buying, building, and completing these nuclear reactors in Alabama. That quickly got over my head about whether that would work or whether that was viable or not. But I started learning the numbers. And so I wrote another op-ed piece this past October after I had learned what savings Memphis could have by leaving TVA. And it was my belief then, and I will show you in a minute why we have not backed down, that we think that number is $450 million a year. And when I wrote that op-ed piece, I got a lot of people out of the woodworks calling me. One of them was Jim Gilliland Sr., Jim's father, who's now my partner, who said, Karl, I can tell you horror stories. Another were former TVA employees in Light, Gas, and Water, and some were our neighbors right over in Northwest Mississippi and Eastern Arkansas, who were telling us about the millions and now billions that they had saved. And so it only piqued my interest that much more when so many people were telling me so many things to fortify the position that I thought I had. So I did more research. And if this as a citizen does not appall you, then I'm talking to the wrong group. But last year, the chairman, the president of TVA made $8.1 million, the highest paid government official in our country. Last year, while he is raising the rates, he paid out $133 million in bonuses. Last year, he hired 5 people on his staff that make over $2 million a year. And last 2 years, if not owning one jet that they paid $12 million was not enough, they bought a second jet for $13 million. And last year, they bought a Mercedes-Benz type helicopter for $8.1 million to go in their fleet. The Inspector General has criticized them. When they did a review, they fly that jet for meetings between Chattanooga and Knoxville, which takes 55 minutes to drive. And they're flying their jet planes back and forth. Folks, TVA is out of control. There are no checks and balances. They don't have to go to any public body anymore to get their budget approved or whatever. What they do have to go to is a board appointed by the president. And I challenge everybody here to look up that board. It is 7 white men, average age of 70-something years old, average net worth probably, and I don't know this for a fact, but probably $100 million. The only one from Memphis, and the only one who does not appear to be a multimillionaire, is John Ryder, and he's the youngest. And many of their meetings are held in secret. They are a good old boys network that takes care of one another and has not been a good steward of our money. And so what they do when they have a new project is they issue more debt. And it's now up to 24 billion in debt. Or they raise our rates. And they are a monopoly. So Dave Freeman, who was still fighting for Memphis Light, Gas, and Water to leave TVA until he died 2 weeks ago at age 94, and until a month before that, he was as active as he could be. Mayor Strickland told me he had never met with anybody so passionate and articulated at age 94. But Dave Freeman said TVA is a monopoly and it is out of control and it is a shame what they're doing. And the last piece that he wrote was a month ago, and he talked about what they were doing in Memphis. So as we speak, they have hired 5 lobbyists to represent them before the city council. They claim because the law says they can't hire lobbyists, they hire PR firms and have the PR firms hire these lobbyists. Ask any city councilman and they'll tell you 3 of them are registered lobbyists. They have started a billboard and TV campaign right now about feel good about TVA and Memphis Light, Gas, and Water. They're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars right now when most energy providers around the country are providing breaks during this COVID-19 and relief. They are spending their money on a good feel good campaign, hiring lobbyists, and now they've hired 3 PR firms in Memphis, all trying to convince them that they're the right thing. So fast forward to what I've learned. This first PowerPoint page, and Jim Gillen Jr. put most all of this together. And I will encourage any of you, if you would take the time to go to our webpage, which is a betterwaythantva.org.
Carl?
A betterwaythantva.org.
Carl?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It looks like we're still looking at your Microsoft Teams. I'm going to stop the sharing from your end, and I'd like you to try it again. If you just click on the share screen at the bottom one time, and then a window should open up.
Okay, wait 1 second. Let me,
Sure.
It does now. I gotta.
There should be a bunch of smaller pictures now. If you'll select the one that is the slide set that you want to show us.
How's that?
Perfect, that's it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. So this slide, like much of this presentation, if Jim Gillen were here, he would give you his background as an investment banker and who has done a lot of financing in the energy space. And interestingly, which I did not know until I went to well, it was really the day before the funeral of Jim Gillen Sr. Jim's daughter, Jim Jr.'s sister, did her thesis at the University of Denver last year on the benefits of Memphis Light, Gas, and Water leaving TVA. So there's a long history of this family knowing what they're talking about. And if you go to our website, we back up everything we're saying. You'll see a page of how we calculate the savings. You'll see the legal opinions. You'll see the history. You will also see that, and we're doing it all with volunteers. We put up our own money. We have gotten some contributions, but you'll see a list of over 150 Memphians who have joined our effort, and it's across the board. Dick Hackett called me up and said, I know the history, put me down. Then Mayor Luttrell, then Mayor Morris, now current Mayor Lee Harris, Steve Cohen, Walter Bailey, Janet Hooks. I could go on. And then the business community who understands what this has done. We got, and I don't mind saying it because he said, use my name. And he said, I want to help this, but Billy Donovan Jr. wrote just the most passionate letter to Jim and I, thanking us for what we were doing. George Cates, the Dobbs family. I could go on and on with the business community, and then civic leaders. We've got ministers, and we've got folks from Whitehaven and Fraser. So we've got a pretty good cross section of people supporting. Now, this is a David Goliath fight because TVA has an unlimited budget. And remember, every lobbyist that they are hiring, every PR firm, every TV commercial they're placing, you and I are paying as ratepayers because they are a monopoly. Memphis Light, Gas, and Water has bought 100% of its power from TVA for, I don't know whether it goes back the entire 80 years, but by contract, we have to buy 97%. It's going to go to 95%, but we buy 100%. And we have to pay whatever they charge us. And so we're dealing with a monopoly and a bureaucracy that's out of control. And so remember what we're doing, this is all by volunteers, but I want to tell you what we put together. TVA goes around and says, hey, we haven't raised rates. Well, it's a smoke and mirror. They will say that they haven't raised base rates, but then they have their add-ons. So go to my bullet point number 2, and you go on our website, and we have the report. And this came from Friends of the Earth, a Herman Morris affiliated organization. And it calculates from the Memphis Light, Gas, and Water annual reports, we've had 30% increase in the last 12 years from TVA. Now, I had one person say to me, wow, well, that's just 3% a year. That's not that bad. And that would be true if we were talking about your cost of food or maybe your automobile cost or whatever. But what people don't realize until you look at it is the cost of energy has been going down. Now, the cost of energy for us has been going up because we have to buy from TVA. But primarily gas costs have gone down, but even solar and wind is a third of what it was 10 or 12 years ago. Fracking has been one of the reasons, but natural gas has driven the cost down. So energy costs have been going down, while for us it's been going up. But here's another thing that makes Memphis very unique. In 2002, when Herman Morris, to his credit, was president of Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, he started exploring leaving TVA. And at the same time, TVA was upside down on these nuclear reactors that they were building, and they were having credit issues. And Light, Gas, and Water entered into an agreement to issue because they had good credit, and TVA was tapped out, even though it was fully backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. They have limitations. And Memphis Light, Gas, and Water issued over $1 billion worth of bonds to help TVA ostensibly finish that Bellefonte nuclear plant. Now, I'm just going to take a little side note, is that they then abandoned it later after spending $8 billion, and it was only 90% complete. No other business that I know of could spend $8 billion on a project that they never opened the doors on or turned on the lights. That's one reason they've been out of control, and that's one reason their debt's so high. But to Herman and the lawyers that represented us at the time, they negotiated in return for issuing that credit. They got a 15-year deal from Light, Gas, and Water that just ran out in 2018, or maybe it was 17, that gave them some reduction, and it also gave them a 5-year out without paying for any of the legacy assets. So typically, if a distributor, which Memphis Light, Gas, and Water is, were to leave TVA, most of them have to give 10-year notice. Light, Gas, and Water, TVA is now trying to change it to 20, but we have a 5-year, and we don't have to pay or assume any of the debt. So Memphis Light Gas and Water represents 11% of TVA. So 11% of their $25 billion worth of debt would be 2.7 or 2.8 billion. Memphis Light Gas and Water has a get out of free card. It can get out with 5 years notice and assume no liabilities and no debt. The second thing that makes Memphis unique is we are, and I'll show you on this next slide, or I'll go this one, we are located right next door to the largest co-op in the country. It serves West Memphis and South Haven, Crittenden County and DeSoto County. And you can see here that MISO is the name of the organization, goes from New Orleans up into Canada. So one of the arguments that TVA uses to everybody is how reliable they are. The reality is MISO is 4.5 to 5 times the size of TVA, and even the latest report says they're every bit as reliable. But more importantly, we can connect into MISO by connecting transmission lines literally into Crittenden County. And so the cost of hookup is extremely light. So if Charlotte, North Carolina, or Knoxville, Tennessee wanted to join MISO, the cost of connectivity would be so great, it would be prohibitive. So the combination, going back here, of us having a 5-year out and a source next door gives us the opportunity to talk about the savings that we're talking about. So prior to last Friday, there had been 4 independent studies that all estimated that the savings would be from a low of 250 to a high of $480 million a year if we leave TVA and join MISO. 250 to $480 million a year. This last Friday, after Memphis Light Gas and Water spent $720,000 on yet a 5th study, hired a company called Siemens, who is a large German conglomerate that happens to be TVA happens to be one of their biggest customers, which we thought should have never been selected, but that happened a couple of years ago. They are such a big customer of TVA that a few years ago, TVA gave them one contract for $140 million. And they opened an office in Chattanooga to service TVA, and TVA advertises them as a VIP contracting partner. And we knew that Siemens' objectivity would at least be suspect. Now, they claim that the work that they do as consultants is behind a Chinese wall and it's different than the contracting work, and that they truly are independent. They are definitely a well-respected German multi-billion-dollar company. They came out and said the savings would be $150 million a year. Now, I'm going to just give you one example of why their number was so much lower than the others. And you're going to be hearing more about this from all of us. But I showed you that TVA over the last 10 years has raised their rates 30%. Just so you'll know, that is almost $300 million of rate increase we've had. TVA claims that in the next 10 years, they are going to lower their rates by $70 million. They don't say how, but that's what they tell their customers. So Siemens gave them a $70 million credit. So if you just took that out, it would have been $220 million of savings if you go off of what we pay today, not what they project their savings will be. Interestingly, this report that's on the right snaps a yellow group that was paid for by Friends of the Earth, which is a nonprofit entity, and they hired an expert out of Chattanooga. They project that TVA's rates over the next 10 years, proportionate to Memphis, will go up 6 to 15%, which will be 54 to 200 million extra. So just that alone will give you an idea of what numbers we're talking about. And so if you read that report, and I've read them because Gillen reads them twice, and I feel like I got to read them. They're so boring. But I will tell you, when you read that report, they point out things like this. TVA, 40% of their power comes from nuclear energies, and their nuclear plants are antiquated, and what antiquated is probably the wrong word, but they are very old, and the nuclear power industry has put out all of these standards that by 2030, nuclear plants are going to have to upgrade to, and the estimate is that's going to be billions of dollars. The other thing is TVA has a lot of their other power comes from coal ash burning plants. And the old one that they had in Memphis, the Allen Steam Plant, and I noticed Ward Archer, who I know for his efforts of trying to protect our aquifer, was listening in on this. If you read the Daily Memphian just 2 months ago, TVA at their board meeting said that to tear down the old Allen Steam Plant, they set aside $65 million, and then they set aside $300 million to clean up the coal ash that they say will take over 6 to 8 years to do. And the Friends of the Aquifer feel like they haven't set aside enough, that they're cutting corners. If you look in East Tennessee, and you may not remember this, but 8 years ago, they had coal ash spills that were like a tsunami, and 500 houses were wiped out. And they've paid over $1.5 billion in settlements, and they have set aside $2 billion for coal ash removal in East Tennessee. So we are tied to this monopoly that is tied to old technology that is not state of the art, that has got deferred maintenance, and it's inconceivable for me to believe that their costs are not going to go up. And yet the Siemens report gave them credit for lowering their costs $70 million over the next 10 years on an annual basis as it relates to Memphis. So we've got now 5 studies. And when I met with the mayor last week, and he wanted Jim Gillen and I to meet with he and Doug McGowan, and to the mayor's credit, he's really trying to understand all of this, and it is complicated. And I said to the mayor, I said, Mayor, if Siemens is right and these other 4 reports are wrong, and the number is 150 million, think about that. Our entire city budget that we just approved last week was $700 million. Memphis Light, Gas, and Water budget's $1.1 billion. So if we reduce the cost by 10%, that's where you come up with the 150 million directionally. And if you could imagine what this city could do with $150 million, and just so you'll know, because the way the city charter is written, and the city has funded Memphis Light, Gas, and Water to the tune of billions of dollars over the years, the city gets to decide what to do with those savings. They can put 100% of them in the coffers. They could return 100% of them to ratepayers. Or if you do what we're recommending and we don't have a voice in it, but we're using it as our examples. If you take, and we think that the number is going to be closer to 450 million. And if you took that number, if we were correct, and you took half of it to ratepayers, remember, there's $1.1 billion we're paying. So if you take 225 million, everybody's utility bill would go down 20%. Your church, your synagogue, Regional 1 hospital, your business, your home, 20%. And the other 200 million would go to the city to be spent however you want. So if you go to our webpage, all of these reports are there. candidly, we got them all off of the Memphis Light, Gas, and Water web page too. So they're part of the public record. You can see they've all been done in the last couple of years. So this is the page that Jim took in how we calculate, how we come up with $450 million. And the reality is the IRP study that came out 2 weeks ago said that our average cost was it's really $76, not $74. So energy has come down so much. If you go on the spot market today and wanted to buy a megawatt, we're paying TVA $74. If you go buy it today, you can buy it for $9. Now, you would not ever buy all of your energy on the spot market. But if you did today, we'd be paying $100 million for what we're paying them $1 billion. But it's not prudent to do that because there are fluctuations and there are gyrations and it's a roller coaster. So the prudent thing you do is you go and enter into long-term contracts that are in the 10-year, 15, 20, and you actually do a blend. It gets above my pay grade, but you have so much, it's just like mixing up your stock market. You have so much 10-year contracts and so much 12 and 5s and 15 and rolls off. But the conventional wisdom that all of these reports have said is we can lock up and fix our rate long-term for about $40 a kilowatt hour. And versus the 74 we're paying now. That comes to 420,000. And when you project what our utilities will be 5 years from now, you'll see that we come up with the 450,000 in savings. Now, interestingly, the IRP report said you can't buy 100% of your savings. You can only buy of your energy. You can only buy 31%. That's how they came up with the 150 million. We believe, and we're going to be able to show that Memphis would be able to buy all of their energy, at least 80 or 90% would not have to generate much. So lastly, I just want to tell you, and then I'm going to shut up and listen to questions, but the smart cities in this country are getting out of the energy generation business. Why? Because they have trouble running their cities well, much less being in the energy business. So New Orleans now generates none of its energy. It sold all of its energy in generation and buys 100% of it through the MISO network. Atlanta has sold off all of its energy. Cities never did well when they got in the energy generation business. And so today you don't have to. 70% of the energy in this country is provided by private companies. And so here's the math. If we switch now, this is just a chart, and you can imagine what we could do with the money. We need $30 million a year to fund our MATA, where we can get poor people to the jobs where they are and have a public transportation system that works. We could reduce property taxes. You could just imagine. What I learned from Mayor Strickland is that on average, our revenue increase per year pre-COVID-19 in this city is 10 to 12 million a year. He's not getting any increase from property tax. That's without a property tax increase. It's virtually all sales tax. And we're in a flat economy, flat growth rate. So he's got 10 to 12 million new dollars to work with every year on a $700 million budget, which will barely pay 1% pay increase and pay for just cost of living. And it doesn't even do that. This city, if it had this kind of money, would be game changer. So if you want to ask me and Jim why we're devoting all of our time and putting our own money up to it, and this is what I told his father, and then later Jim, I said, listen, I'm a lifelong Memphian. I have never seen an opportunity as big as this that could be as transformational for this city, is to get that kind of money recurring into our economy every year. MISO is the reason we're promoting is because they're next door. They do not generate any power. They're a co-op. They got a transmission network that goes from New Orleans to Canada. And then there is a separate nonprofit entity called ACES that goes out and contracts for all the members of MISO, and they're the procurement arm, and they go out to bid with an RFP. So I could talk on and on. I can talk so many reasons why the IRP is flawed, but I've decided to say, hey, let's just assume it isn't flawed. 150 million isn't anything to sneeze at. But if you want to read all of this, is on our webpage, why we think it's flawed. And the next step, so you ask what is next. So the next, and this is my last slide, is you do a request for proposal. Now, Memphis Light, Gas, and Water contended that they had to go through this 1.5 year process to do an IRP before they could do an RFP. We don't think that was true, but it doesn't matter. It's been done. So now, J.T. Young said to the city council, when this IRP is through, he said, and we got a 30-day comment period, and then we're going to digest it and study it. Sometime this fall, we're going to do an RFP, and I estimate the RFP is going to take 12 to 18 months. Now, he has also been quoted in the paper one time saying that it would take 18 to 24 months. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt. He was talking about these months of this summer or whatever. ACES, who is the largest procurement arm in the country, for the largest co-op in the country, 5 times the size of TVA, says they can complete an RFP in 8 to 10 weeks. Folks, we're talking about $20 to $40 million a month in savings. And then lastly, I will just tease everybody with this. You say, well, this is great, but we're going to have to wait 5 years. UBS, and others would do the same, have put in writing that the day we sign and give the 5-year notice, they're willing to issue $1 billion worth of bonds to the city that we could borrow against these savings. Now, that's another decision, and we're agnostic whether the city decides to speed it up or not. And then there's also some belief that, believe it or not, there is a movement in Congress headed up by Trump to dismantle TVA. And then you'll notice on our webpage that we say that there's only thing that I can find that Barack Obama and Donald Trump both agreed on was the need to dismantle TVA. So you will not hear me very rarely agree with Donald Trump on much of anything. I probably shouldn't get into this because half the people that are signed up to support this cause. So this is a nonpartisan cause. So I retract that. I don't want to get into it. I just want to say that Trump and Obama both are against the monopoly of TVA. So we may be able to escalate through legislation or whatever and get out of the 5-year notice requirement. That's to be determined, but that's our worst case scenario. So I've gone over a lot. I've missed a lot. So let me open it up to questions.
Karl, thanks very much. Again, this is Will McGriff. I'm going to read off a couple of questions that people have been submitting in the chat while you've been talking. One that's come up a couple times already is, are there any other potential suppliers besides MISO? And at the same time, someone asked, is this similar, is MISO similar to the Louisiana Energy and Power Authority?
So in all likelihood, MISO is our only alternative. There is a co-op that is adjacent to MISO called the Southwest Co-op or something that actually goes into Western Arkansas. And they actually have energy cheaper than MISO because their primary source is all the windmills that are out west. And they want to take a run at it. They would have to pay a lot to transmit from their network all across from Western Arkansas into Memphis. and most people think they could not be cost prohibitive, but they would have a shot at it. Other than that, there's probably not another realistic alternative. My belief is that the Louisiana Energy that you referred to is the same thing that West Memphis and South Haven buy from it, which is a competitor, or what was similar to Louisiana, which was called Entergy, Entergy. And they were old energy providers that now they sell into their energy into MISO, and MISO team members buy it. So I think that was what New Orleans used to own. They sold it. It's now private, and that entity sells its energy into MISO. I'm not 100% correct on that.
Thank you. I've got a few more questions. I'll read them to you. One is a kind of a two-parter. Does using TVA or MISO or other options have any particular impact on our current electrical infrastructure? And over time, does the decreasing dependence on big electrical infrastructure play into the decision-making process? As far as,
you know, it's a good question, and I think the answer is it doesn't. Memphis Light, Gas, and Water still owns all of the transmission lines. There won't be a person at Memphis Light, Gas, and Water that loses his or her job. They still are the ones that trim the trees around the power lines and put the power lines back up when there's a wind damage or whatever. So the infrastructure remains the same. What we would not have is the new Allen steam plant, which is the only asset that TVA owns in Memphis, would remain being owned by TVA. Memphis now gets 26% of its power from that steam plant, and the rest from the rest of the TVA. So if we were to leave, TVA claims they would still own that, they would retain ownership of that steam plant, but the rest of the infrastructure stays with Light, Gas, and Water.
Okay, thank you. Some other questions. Someone asked if there's going to be any cost for switching over or signing up with MISO.
Yes, there are some one-time costs. There's about a estimated $700,000 annual membership fee to be part of MISO, and there's about $300 million connectivity fees, is what the IRP report of 2 weeks ago estimates that it would cost if you did all of the transmission connected into MISO. All of those costs were factored into what their savings would be, but there are some one-time setup costs without a doubt.
Thank you. Another question is, do you feel that the MLGW needs to have some ability to generate its own electricity as a safety maneuver or safety measure in the event that something happens on the spot market?
So one, keep in mind, Memphis Light, Gas, and Water generates zero now. So the question is, if we left TVA, do we need to have a source other than buying through MISO? And there are some that have suggested that we should have some alternatives for some amount. There's different ways to do that. A couple of weeks ago, Entergy, that does all of West Memphis and South Haven, they said, hey, we will build you your solar farms and we will manage them for you if that's where you want to have an alternative. That's what the RFP does. There's others that would do that. That's a decision that has to be made. Do we contract and have some dedicated generation? It would be no different than buying our solar from somebody else than buying it from ourselves, other than it would be dedicated to us. And there are some that say it's more prudent to have some of your power dedicated to you. But I want to say one other thing about all of that. All of this is regulated by the same Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So even the IRP said that there is zero difference in reliability between TVA and MISO. So there's different ways to skin the cat, but there's no one right answer.
Thank you. Another question that came in was, do you believe that TVA could or should be excluded from the RFP process?
Absolutely not. But here is the facts. TVA's CEO has said repeatedly, you have our offer. We do not negotiate. And there's some reason for that, not just to throw him under the bus, because by his very charter, he cannot offer Memphis a different rate than he offers Nashville under the same terms. So what he does have now is, if you sign a 20-year evergreen contract, which means every day you have to give a new 20-year notice to get out of, he will give you a 3% discount. And we do not get that 3% discount today because we haven't signed that 20-year deal. But he can't offer Memphis a better deal than he can Jackson, Tennessee. So, and he has said our rates are our rates and we will not negotiate. So the RFP is, TVA, give us your best rates, which he says he already has, and let's compare them.
Thank you. I see one more question in the chat. And then after that, I'll certainly leave it open to anybody else who wants to jump in. But the last question, I think, from the chat was, why do we even need a middleman like MISO? Could MLGW contract directly with a provider if they so chose?
You know, I don't know that answer. I do know that nobody else does that. So there must be some reason, because you have to connect into a transmission network to get your power brought to you. And MISO is the network that we would connect to, replacing TVA. So I think you have to be part of some network. Now, the rest of the country, most of it is part of one of these co-ops. We just happen to be in the last government entity with TVA. So I don't pretend to know all. Hey, listen, I've learned more about this than I ever wanted, but I only know so little. So, but I don't think that's an option, to be honest.
Thank you. As I was speaking, as you were speaking, there were two more questions that just came in. First was, is the initial decision to leave TVA and change providers made by the MLGW board and then confirmed by the city council, or is there another process?
No, that is the process. The Light, Gas, and Water Board will make a recommendation to the city council, but it is ultimately requires the city council to approve a notice to leave.
Okay. And then actually, I'm going to turn this one over. Nancy, I see that you asked a question about the termination contract. I'm not exactly sure how to word this best because I don't understand contract law. But if you want to chime in, Nancy, and ask your question directly. Have I muted everybody? Oh, here we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Came in kind of midway, and what I heard was that MLGW has the ability to leave with 5 years notice, which is short, and that there is no liability for assets. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. I was just getting clear with that.
Normally, if you're part of TVA and you're 11%, in the old contracts, you could have been responsible for 11% of the debt if you left.
What would the contract with MISO look like?
The contract with MISO is you're a member of a nonprofit, and MISO does not generate any power, so you can leave whenever you want to. You contract to buy your power from third parties. That and it would depend on the term of your contract, but it'd be a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year. So you contract with a solar farm to buy solar energy for 10 years, and in the 10 years you don't have to buy, or you can renew, or depending on the contract, but there wouldn't be penalties.
Okay, and I think, is there a backup, if that fails?
Absolutely, and think about this, in MISO, you got towns the size of Minneapolis and Columbus, Ohio, and St. Louis and stuff. And so all of them have backup. And I'm not professing to tell you how you put all your contracts together, but you do have backup contracts and you overbuy and et cetera. But I can tell you that it's being done all across the country. So there's safe ways to do it.
And you likened it a little bit to Entergy. Can you talk to
Well,
that?
I referred to Entergy because Entergy wrote a letter to the Entergy is a for-profit energy company, like so many are out there, that sells energy to Entergy used to be owned by all of these communities, like in Mississippi and Arkansas. They spun it off. Entergy became a for-profit entity, and they still contract to sell energy that they generate into the West Memphises and South Havens of the world. And Entergy would be somebody that would be bidding on our RFP to provide us energy.
Okay. That was all I needed.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you
for coming too.
Yes.
It's been informative.
So this is a commercial. Listen, if any of y'all are interested in, if you want to sign up, if you go to abetterwaythantva.org and let us use your name, my email is Karl with a K, Karl at monogramfoods.com. If you email me, you know, our entire budget is $30,000 and we've raised 20. We'll take money, but we've taken out a few ads. This is a David Goliath fight. I'm telling you, TVA flies in on their jets and they hire these lobbyists and they're whining and dining the city councilman, and they're telling stories about brownouts and blackouts and you can't put a price on reliability and all of these things, and they're smoke and mirrors. And ask your neighbors in St. Louis or Minneapolis whenever they had a brownout or a blackout. Those are things of the past. I mean, there's energy disruptions because of acts of God, but we're all regulated the same way. So anyway, go to abetterwaythantva.org and help us if you're interested.
Thank you, Karl. I'll put a link to the website and Karl's address, email address in the chat if you want to copy that for yourself. You're getting a lot of thanks from our members. I think people are really enjoying your talk and appreciate your time. Is there anybody else who has a question that you want to ask on your own? Seeing none, hearing none. I just want to say again, Karl, thanks so much for joining us tonight and educating us on this issue. I know this is
just terrific.
Yeah, very worthwhile.
And during this pandemic, if I could, I recommend everybody eat King Cotton hot dogs, King Cotton bacon, King Cotton smoked sausage. It'll help you through this pandemic.
Thank you. Curative powers, I'm sure. All right.
Thank you, Karl.
Thank you all very much. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And everybody, again, thanks for joining us tonight. We'll plan to see you in 2 weeks. Again, we'll have speakers from Church Health. Brian is helping us, as well as Adele Landers getting that coordinated. Looking forward to that. Again, congratulations to the new directors who will be taking over, and other officers will be taking over in July. Any other club business that needs to be addressed?
One other thing.
Thank you.
On July 7th, I think I have the date right. Tuesday, July 7th, we will have a representative from TVA.
Okay.
And it took me 3 weeks. It took me 3 weeks to saddle up someone. But July 7th, we'll have that opposing view.
And
Thank
Karl,
you,
you're welcome to listen in.
Right.
Yeah,
Please
you're
do.
always welcome back. All right.
Will, thank you
Yes.
so much for your year plus terrific leadership for the club. Thank you.
Y'all are a great crew. I appreciate
Thanks, Will.
y'all being
Thank
your
you, Will.
patience and your support. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Well, with that, I will say good evening. Go eat some dinner, take a walk, do some service, but from a socially appropriate distance.
And eat some King Cotton.
Eat some King Cotton
Some
hot
King
dogs
Cotton.
and-
All
Go
right.
get
That's
some
right.
King Cotton hot dogs.
Right.
All right.
See y'all later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Go again. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. This was great.
Big red leave.
Bye, Cheryl. Bye, Amy.